right. Well, today we have Brother Melvin Ote with us, and I am excited about this conversation. I remember the first time we met at PTP, and man, just hearing your logical explanation of the Word of God was truly inspiring to me. And so I'm a huge fan, if you will. But I'm thankful you're on the show today, man. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing very well. Yeah, and I appreciate it. I remember meeting you and your wife also. Well, now your wife. So you guys made an impression on me and my wife, and very glad to know you guys and to get to know you better. Looking forward to chatting with you tonight.
Well, that means everything to us, man. Like I said, we're super excited to that all of that worked out back at PTP. That she's now my wife, and
Hmm.
I'm a lucky man, so I'm thankful.
Yeah,
And of course, we
yeah.
have the little one, and of course, that's been a blessing and a thriller in and of itself. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a preacher. Of course, I didn't start off as a preacher, though. I didn't even grow up in a particularly religious background. I guess like a lot of people, I went to church services sometimes. Usually with my grandmother. When I was little, I'd go with her all the time. But as I got to be a bit older, probably 12 or 13, nobody made me go, so I didn't. But when
Mm,
she asked me to go, I would.
yeah.
And that probably was, that was it for me until I became an adult. So I went to school for business and then to school for law and was practicing law when I became a Christian. So I was an attorney first.
Okay.
But usually when people ask me like, what do? I tell them I'm a preacher first because that's the most important thing.
Mm,
So I'm a preacher and now I'm a law professor. I used to practice law. I did that for 14 or 15 years, and I've been teaching law at Faulkner now for about 7 years.
man, perfect, man. I remember, of course, I'm from Alabama, so I think Faulkner is a NAIA school, right?
That's right.
Okay, yeah, I had a partial scholarship to Faulkner right out of high school for football. Of course, I went to the spring training and all of that, and man, they tried to move my position from linebacker to cornerback. Wasn't super excited about that. So,
Okay.
of course, I sort of shied away from that opportunity and ended up going to South Alabama, and ultimately, financial reasons led me to
All
another
of those
path
type of
of
things.
things. And I just want to ask this question first. Where did law originate, and what is its purpose?
Well, you've got two sort of sources, okay, or maybe I should say you have three. Obviously, you have God's law first, because you go back to Genesis, he creates Adam and Eve and puts them in the garden, and he tells them what they're supposed to do. Adam and Eve are supposed to keep the garden, so that's their job. He gave them that; they were supposed to take care of that. But he also told them they could eat of all the trees in the garden except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So right there is a limitation, and we usually think about law in a negative sense, telling us what we cannot do. And most of the time, that's true. There are also some positive laws, though, telling us that we do have to do certain things, right?
Mm,
But so you have God's law. And of course, that's for the whole human family. He tells us that some things are wrong, some things are right, obviously, but some things are wrong. Um, so you have that. But then if you think about, this is the one I was going to leave out initially, but in the home, you have law, right? Law
yeah.
is just a matter of an authority telling you what you cannot do or what you have to do. Okay,
Gotcha.
so in a home, in a family setting, somebody's going to have to set some rules. Some people don't love rules, but try living in an environment where there are no rules. Like no one would enjoy that. And so in a family setting, what time are you going to eat dinner? What time are the kids going to go to bed? Who's going to, have certain kinds of chores? What kinds of things are going to be permissible in terms of how we speak to each other or how we treat each other? So that also is a type of law. And I say that because, again, I think most people would overlook it. But if you go back to the first human beings, okay, they had some order among themselves. There were some rules about how they would conduct themselves. But when they started to have children, somebody was going to have to tell the child no. Some
Gotcha.
things were not okay for the child to do. So that one maybe some people would miss. But the big one that people would think about outside of God's law are the laws of a particular state. So governments will have to have some restrictions on how people interact with each other, what they can and cannot do. This would have always been true. Like even before there was ever an official city state, If you've got more than one family living in close proximity together, okay, how are we going to determine where one person's home is and another person's home is, right? Where's the dividing
Yeah,
line?
makes sense.
So you got to have some rules to order a society, to order a group of people. And once you progress to the point where you've got formal government, okay, then those people are in power in part to make rules that allow all of us to live quiet, hopefully, and peaceable lives. So there's a negative aspect telling you what you can't do. But even those things, if they're conceived properly, are to help us to live orderly, good lives. So law is supposed to be positive, right? Even if it
Right.
restrains you, it's restraining certain freedoms that you have for the benefit of the peace, for the benefit of the community.
Man, that's if I'm understanding you correctly, it seems that even the laws that are negative, as well as the laws that are positive, is to benefit all humans. And
That's right.
so, of course, if those laws are conceived and acted upon properly, it sort of reminds me of this, considering that we're talking about sportsmanship, of course, making the comparison between the real world and the sports world. Some athletes just, I mean, you can see it on their faces, man. It's like they forget certain rules in the game exist. And so when they get called for a flagrant foul or something like that, I know there's a debate about, especially in the NBA, the game being a little bit softer than it was in the past. Of course, rules are amended and things of that nature, but ultimately it is to benefit those athletes and protect them while participating in this sporting exhibition. I think the next thing that I kind of think about, especially when it goes to laws, man, being a Christian, there was one thing that I was especially taught in high school. You weren't supposed to bring your religious beliefs and ideas into the classroom and
Mm.
try to discuss that among students, with teachers, anything like that. You weren't supposed to do that. And I remember asking this question. I think I was in 11 in the 11th grade at the time, and I said, "Why?" I said, why can't we talk about God in school just as we would, at home?" And this was the answer that I received. Well, there was a law that says there is to be a separation of church and state.
Mm.
So I want to ask you about that. I never really understood it. I never really looked into it that much until preparing for this episode. But what does that law dictating the separation of church and state mean for the Christian?
Yeah, so this is the thing, right? Because there is no law that actually dictates separation between church and state. If you go back to it, the Constitution says two important things. One, that there would be no establishment of religion, the establishment clause. So the government is not supposed to establish an official religion. If they, because, and part of this comes from the fact that the people who came to America from Europe were part of countries that had formal government embraced religions, so
Okay,
like
makes sense.
in England, they had the Church of England.
Right.
Everybody had to, and they were in Europe killing people who didn't agree with whatever it is that they thought. And so when people
That's
came
true.
over here, they came over here fleeing from religious persecution. And one of the things they agreed on is, okay, there will be no formal government established religion.
Hmm.
Um, it does not say separation between church and state. That's not the same thing at all. As a matter of fact, that language comes from like a letter, I think it was from Thomas Jefferson, and that language didn't make it into the Constitution. That was his thinking, and people have sort of exchanged that one man's thinking for what was intended, and it was never intended to be that. That's the first thing. Now, the other thing, though, to keep in mind from the Constitution is that it says that 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 everyone has a right to the free exercise of religion. People really don't pay that enough attention. It
Mm.
doesn't say I have the right to believe what I want to believe. I have the right to personally have a religion. It says I have the right to exercise my religion.
Mm.
Okay, so what does that mean, exercising my religion? Well, that means that I can pray, that I can talk about my religion, I can invite other people to learn more about my religion, I can live out the tenets of my faith. As long as me living out the tenets of my faith is not trampling on somebody else's rights or interests, right? It doesn't require me to hurt anybody or take anything from people. Just I can believe what I want to believe, and I can practice what my religion tells me to practice. According to the Constitution, that's not supposed to be hindered.
Mm.
Now, my interests are not the only interest to keep in mind. So it certainly is possible for my thinking about my religion to impinge on somebody else's rights, and there'd be a limit there potentially. But this idea of separation in church and state, it truly is unfortunate. Most people today sort of take that and they accept that as being, what this country was expected to be, the way it was founded, and it just was not. At one point, the Supreme Court adopted that language from Jefferson, and they read it into the Constitution, and things began to be different then. But you think about this, when you go back and you read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, those people were talking about the God of the Bible in the documents that helped to found the country. Okay, those people, even if you looked at the constitutions of, I think all of the 50 states, unless they've changed them, at least they used to, all of them made reference to the God of the Bible, the Constitution of the state. So how is that? How is it now like it's unconstitutional to mention God? How is that possible? Okay, that's a new thing.
Right.
If you go back, when we began to have formal organized schools in the United States, they would use the Bible as the reader. They use the Bible to teach kids how to read. Now, what am I saying? I don't think that means you have to do that. I'm only saying that when the country was founded, people didn't think that the Constitution required that you couldn't mention God or that you couldn't read the Bible. That is impossible because the people who founded the country mention God all the time in the public sphere. You think about even right now in Congress, okay, they open those sessions with prayer. Why do they do that? Because most of these guys are not particularly religious people. So why do they do that? They do that because it's always been done that way. It's always been done that way. There's never been a time where it wasn't done that way. So now how is it all of a sudden improper to mention God or mention the Bible? It just is it's unfortunate, and people don't know enough, but
That's true, man. That is funny, and in fact, I had a thought when you mentioned why do they pray before some type of congressional meeting. I remember this guy who recently prayed, or relatively recently, and he used the word "a woman." I don't
yeah,
even know.
that's right. I think he did like father, mother, something like that. He was trying to do
Yeah.
the gender inclusive thing. Yeah.
And I had a thought, and you mentioned, people just don't know enough, and I'm thinking like, man, that is not, the word that you think it is. It really is. It has no gender. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a word meaning to verify or verily, verily.
I agree. True.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
And I'm thinking like, man, when he used it, I said, well, this is he's obviously missed the point of that word here. But I mean, it does. Thank you for clarifying too, because as I stated before, I had no idea of this separation of church and state, and I was afraid to actually mention about Jefferson's letter because I didn't know how true that was. I mean, I watched a couple YouTube videos and saw some people mention that, but I didn't know how true that was. But apparently, man, I mean, goodness, you just take and read someone else's work. I mean, did they even have the context of what he was talking about, or?
Well, Jefferson was, I think you could call him a deist. Like he kind of believed that there is a God, but not a God who's, not necessarily really the God of the Bible, or, that God is actually still involved. Like he was not. You would not classify him as a Christian.
Right.
He's a sort of pseudo religious guy. Now, on the point that I make, so if you read through some of his writings, if you're a person who's a Christian, you believe in the Bible, and you read the stuff he's saying, like it's going to seem pretty far out. Like, whoa, where is he coming from? But the point is, his perspective on those things was not the majority perspective. Okay, he was well known for his sort of religious proclivities, just his idiosyncrasies religiously. But most of the people who did sign the Declaration of Independence, who were involved in the first Congress and the Constitution, most of those people would have identified themselves as Christians. They believed not only in the Bible, they believed in the God of the Bible, and they believed in Jesus. So my point is, he had this thinking, but his thinking didn't make it into the founding documents of the United States because his position was an extreme minority position.
Hmm.
So it's dishonest, right? Hundreds of years later, it's dishonest to come along and now say, no, that's what they meant. When we
Hmm.
know that's not what they meant, we absolutely know that's not what they meant. Just dishonest. But, you know, that
Man,
is what the Supreme Court has made it to mean, which
right.
has raises some other concerns to me about what the Supreme Court is supposed to do and what it's not supposed to do. But
Well, I mean, I definitely understand their role to interpret the laws and stuff like that because of I mean, they obviously the founding fathers could not think of how to, manage or oversee social media and things like that because it wasn't around then.
mhm.
But it has raised some eyebrows, at least in my mind, because I was always confused about that, and that was something a teacher of mine said was law, and so it sort of leads into this next question. Given that the laws of man is not perfect, in fact, far from perfect, are Christians to abide by the law of this land, and specifically in America or anywhere that they are currently living? Are they to abide by the law of the land?
Well, God expects us to follow the laws. He expects us to be law abiding citizens. And the Bible talks about that in Romans 13 in particular. It just talks about the fact that God sets up government, he sets up rulers. And the passage talks about kings, but that's just whoever the executive, whoever's in charge. Their function is to restrain evil. That's to protect everybody. So they're the ones on earth. God says, don't kill. Okay. They're the ones on earth who are going to say, okay, don't kill. And if you do kill, here's the punishment. God says, don't steal. They're the ones on earth who are going to say, okay, don't steal. And if you do, I am going to be responsible for punishing you, right? So if they do that, then the Bible calls them the ministers or the servants of God. They're performing a function that God wants performed because that allows me and you to live, um, quiet, hopefully peaceable lives. It's what me, if I come home and my front door is being kicked in, I can stay outside and call the police, and the police have the authority of the government to come and to find whoever it is. Or, if somebody hurts me, I don't have to retaliate. I can call, and there's a sovereign, there's a ruler who's supposed to take care of those things. And that allows me to be the kind of person that God wants me to be. That allows me to live a quiet life, right? And it helps people, those immediate earthly consequences discourage people from doing things they're not supposed to do. Now,
Right.
I say all that to say, so rightly conceived, the law is supposed to be for our good, and God expects his people to cooperate with and follow the law. Now, there certainly are times, though, where the law is not good. You think about in Germany, I just use some real obvious things. In Germany, they were exterminating the Jews, okay? By law, the Jews were like not human beings. Their property was subject to be forfeited because they were Jewish. They were to be killed and all these kinds of things. And lots of German citizens cooperated with those laws because it was the law. Okay, but they were blameworthy because those were not right laws. Those laws contravened God's laws, and God's expectation would have been that they would not have participated in something like that. In the United States, we had slavery, and there's the whole thing about, slavery. Slavery's been around for a whole long time, but what we had here in the United States is different than a lot of the other kinds of things people think about slavery being indentured servitude or something like that.
Hmm.
But that was the law. That was codified in the Constitution of the United States at least 3 times, that we were going to have slavery here, and that kind of thing, the way it was done here in particular, it just wasn't right. It wasn't
Right.
right. So there's some things that even though the human law may say that you have to do or that you cannot do, let's say, for example, there are some places, China maybe, where you can't tell people about Jesus. And I know that China's loosening up some, but some countries would have rules where you can't tell people about Jesus. Well, then Jesus says, tell everybody about me. So we have a problem.
Right.
And if God's law supersedes man's law. So if man's law actually directly contradicts God's law, then God would expect me to follow his law.
It's interesting that you even sort of ended with that, because it leads into the next question. And before I even get into that, I just wanted to really give two examples that came to my mind when thinking about the statement that you just ended with. I'm still expected to obey God's law, if it, especially if there's a contradiction between man's law and the law of God. Number one thing comes to my mind is Daniel chapter 6, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so Daniel, they knew that Daniel prayed every, so often throughout the day, and it was a habit, really a routine. It was something that he did constantly, and so they got the law to be changed that any person praying or paying homage to some other deity rather than the king were to essentially die, be thrown into the lion's den.
Mhm.
Another thing I think about is the Boston Tea Party. Okay, so I know a lot of people is against looting. I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a supporter of it myself, but I cannot deny that in certain situations when looting have taken place, it was to oppose some false or law or something that was unjust, and eventually it brought about change. And so in my mind, I'm thinking of this question here is like, well, is civil disobedience ever allowed for the Christian?
So this is a good question. And you mentioned the Boston Tea Party. Okay. There's a difference between civil disobedience and rioting and looting. The Boston Tea Party was rioting and looting. Rioting and looting is not okay. So what we do, we go back and we romanticize rebellion historically if we
Mm,
like it. If we like the people who did it or if we like the results that came from it. But see, it's either right or wrong. So, the Boston Tea Party, we're not happy with the taxes. So we're going to go and destroy other people's property. That's either right or wrong. Okay. If it was right for them to do it back then it's okay for people to do it right now. I say no, it's not okay to destroy other people's property just because I'm not happy about something.
mm,
I don't have a right to destroy other people's property unless they're trying to injure me with it or something like that. I don't have a justification for doing that. That was true, you know, during the Boston Tea Party time, and it's still true today.
mm,
Civil disobedience is different, though. Civil disobedience is I recognize that a law is unjust, or I recognize that an official is doing something that is wrong. And so I will not cooperate with that. And if there were a law, for example, that would require me to cooperate with something that is unjust and wrong, then I will refuse. I will resist. But that does not involve me injuring other people. It doesn't involve me destroying anybody else's property. I'm not going to comply, and I am going to accept the consequences of my disobedience.
mm.
Okay. So, I don't, again, maybe some people have some different ideas about this, but I'm going to try to use a couple of examples that I think people will be familiar with. If you
Sure.
take like Rosa Parks, right? Rosa Parks is sitting on the bus, and they have these rules where Black people have to sit in the back of the bus. And she says, well, I'm not going to move. Okay. Those laws, this is why I say some people could disagree with it. I've heard people
Yeah.
say some different things, but the fact is, those laws were dehumanizing. And she says, well, I'm not going to do that. Now, whether you think that was okay or not, the fact is, it was an act of civil disobedience. She thought those laws were dehumanizing, so she refused to comply. And when they came to arrest her for breaking the unrighteous law, she just went to jail.
Mhm.
Okay. And you go back to when people would do like the sit-ins, when they would have people would go to, and this was a lot of young people were the ones doing this. College students
Yeah.
were the ones doing this. They would go to a restaurant, and at the restaurant, black people couldn't sit at the bar. I don't mean the bar like to serve alcohol, but they used to have restaurants where you could just go and sit up and order a burger and a shake and all that, and just sit up there and eat.
Right.
And they weren't supposed to sit there, and they would go and sit there, and then the police would come. If they were lucky, the police would come and arrest them, and they would go to jail for that, and they just accepted it. Now if they were not lucky, the people who were there would beat
Yeah.
them, right?
Yep.
But I'm saying that's civil disobedience. That's different than rioting and looting. We live in a society that allows us to protest. I mean, that's written into our founding documents, because our country is founded on protest. Our country's founded on protest. Like, people sometimes act today like they've just never seen it, but
Yeah.
the country wouldn't be here if it weren't for protest. And our founding documents allow for it. So people can assemble and voice their displeasure, and that's okay. Now, when you start hurting people or destroying property and so forth, that's a different thing altogether.
Hmm. It makes sense. And even if I may just go back to the examples that you gave with Rosa Parks and those college students who really challenged the unjust law, at least to them in their perspectives, would you? I mean, I guess would you say that it would be okay for Christians today to oppose a law? Because in my mind, I'm thinking that when Daniel had to know that the law was changed. At least I believe he did. I mean, he had to know that it was changed, but he still continued to pray to God. And so, I mean, do we have a responsibility to challenge an unjust law that obviously would restrict our religious freedom or anything like that?
Yeah, and of course there are degrees to this. Some things are direct contraventions of a responsibility to worship, right? And so for
Okay.
most people, that one's pretty obvious and pretty clear. But what if there were some things that would maybe not be quite as prominent and obvious and clear, where certain people were being dehumanized or victimized? Okay, I could certainly see a circumstance where I say, well, I'm not going to cooperate with this, because this is participating in something that I know offends God, the mistreatment of other human beings. I'm not going to do that. But now, if you go back to Daniel, in Daniel 6, for sure, he knew, because I believe it says, when he knew the writing had been signed, he went into his house, and as it was his custom, he, with his windows open, he turned his face to Jerusalem and he prayed 3 times a day. He didn't have a choice. He didn't have a choice. I have to obey God or I have to obey man, and man is telling me to disobey God. Okay, so I'm going to do what God says. But here's the key: he knew the writing had been signed.
Mhm.
He made a conscious decision that he was going to do what God wanted him to do. And when they came to arrest him for doing it, guess what? He's willing to accept punishment.
Mm. So that's the
He,
key then.
he doesn't resist. He just,
Mm.
okay, if you guys want to put me to death for doing what God says, guess what? I guess you're going to have to put me to death, because I'm going to do what God says. And then if you go back to his friends when they were being put into the fiery furnace, remember, the king says, I'm going to have this music to play. And when the music plays, you guys bow down to the image that I've made. And if you do that, everything's going to be good. If you don't, then you're going into this furnace. And those guys said, we're not careful to answer you in this matter. Yeah, it's okay.
Mhm.
We believe God can deliver us, but if he doesn't, we're still not going to
Still
do
not gonna bow. Yeah.
it. They didn't try to overthrow the government. They just, no, man, it's not right. People don't have a real tolerance for this kind of thing today. Um, but I just say again, you got to be careful. If you
Right.
like the people, then you romanticize it and they're heroes.
Mm.
If you don't like the people, then you vilify them. But it's the same thing. And I think sometimes we get it wrong in both directions. Like, some of the people that we romanticize and make heroes of, they were doing the wrong thing.
Mm.
but we like them, so we
Exactly.
we approve. But then other people we don't like, but they're actually doing the right thing. It just got to be real careful with that.
And I think the key part that you stated was they didn't resist arrest. And in my mind, I think that's something that even I truly don't understand or didn't understand about those people opposing the law. I mean, there are consequences that you're going to have to suffer. And so I guess you're choosing the consequences that you want to suffer. Either I'm going to choose to accept the consequences for obeying God that's going to come from humanity, or obeying humanity and choosing to accept the consequences that are going to come from God. I mean, which one are going to be, uh, you know, I guess a heavier matter to deal with, and of course the consequences that come from God. A thing that I think about too, most people would consider, and most people, I mean Christians, they would consider how to be more tactful if a law was to restrict them in their religious freedom. So not directly facing or opposing that law, but how can I be more tactful, maybe to navigate around it? And I guess that's a more direct question. Is that considered okay? Because I mean, I'm always told to be prudent, right? I'm always told to be careful because I am, currently a student in a secular institution, and you have to be careful what you say, slogans you wear in your shirts, things of that nature. But it's not the same for everybody, and that's a conversation for another day. But I mean, is that okay? Should I be looking for ways to be more tactful and navigate around the issue, or face that issue head on when it comes to a law that's restricting my religious freedom?
Well, this is a matter of wisdom. It's hard to paint with a really broad brush there because every situation isn't exactly the same and the people involved are not exactly the same. You just have to use some wisdom. So, um, you know, one of the things, this is an example that I think people will resonate with people a little because it's so recent, like with the COVID and everything that was going on last year. Okay, we had situations where the government was telling Christians, was telling everybody, okay, it just included Christians, you can't have gatherings of more than, however many people.
Right.
Or if you do gather, you can't, in some places they say you can't sing indoors, or you have to be separated by so much space, or you have to wear masks and so forth. And man, I got so many calls from Christians all over the country who were just up in arms, and they were like, well, the time has come, we have to resist and we have to obey God rather than man. And I said, listen, did these people tell you you couldn't worship? They didn't tell you you
No, they
couldn't
didn't.
worship.
They didn't.
They put certain restrictions on you, and the restrictions are not particular to you. They put restrictions on everybody for the public safety, for the public good. That is their job. Okay. And they're saying it's not safe for groups of people to meet indoors under these kinds of circumstances. Now, does God require you to worship inside a particular building? I'm going to go with no.
No.
Okay, because you can do everything God asks you to do, like outside. You could do it in a park somewhere. You don't have to have a building at all to do what God requires you to do. Okay, if they told you you couldn't sing indoors, did they tell you you couldn't sing? Because you could sing in the parking lot. Like you can do everything God expects you to do and comply with what the government is telling you to do in order to protect the public safety. You don't want to do it. That is a different thing.
Hmm.
You feel inconvenienced by it. That is a radically different thing. That does not put God in conflict with the government. It puts the government in conflict with your preferences, and that's not the same thing.
That's true.
So my point is, this is where wisdom comes in. I just say to the folks, listen, guys, you could assemble in the parking lot. Some of these people calling me from like California. The weather's beautiful. What is the problem?
Right.
What is the problem?
You
You
gotta wear a
could.
suit. You gotta wear a suit and dress.
Yeah, well, here when they had these restrictions going on, we were having the parking lot type services where people would pull into the parking lot and sit in their cars. And when I preach, like standing outside with like, and there was, I don't know how to do it, but we had people who did know how to do it, and they'd have it rigged to where the audio would go into the vehicles.
Hmm.
So I'm standing outside, they're sitting in their cars and their families, we're in the parking lot, and the audio was coming through their cars. And so we were all together. People let their windows down and we could sing. My point is, did we love doing that? We did not love doing that, but we were able to do it and do everything God wanted us to do and still comply with the law. So you just have to use some wisdom. And I think sometimes we're too quick to think, well, if we can't do it the way we've always done it, or if we can't do it the way somebody else does it, or if we can't do it the way we want to do it, then then it's time to break the law. No,
Right.
no. Imagine if somebody said to you, you can't, if the law was, you can't evangelize, you can't tell people or invite people to know who Jesus is in the workplace.
Hmm.
So that's not great. I don't love that. But does God tell me I have to tell people about it about Jesus in the workplace? No, he doesn't.
Hmm.
No, he doesn't. So I could still do what God wants me to do. My only point here is, okay, we got to use some wisdom. And some of the things that we think about being in conflict is not actually in conflict. There's a pretty clear pathway for us to satisfy God and the secular laws. And if that exists, we have to take it.
Hmm. I think a quote I heard a long time ago from one of my mentors, I think fits well here. He says, "Sin is the transgression of God's law, not the transgression of your opinion."
Yeah.
And I think that is something I've been trying to learn for a long time. Because boy, if it just don't sit well with me, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's wrong for everybody.
Well,
and
we're all like that, when it comes to, the whole masking thing is a big thing. And
yeah,
some people are like, just absolutely refuse to wear a mask. I'm like, I get it, but listen, as long as they tell you that you need to wear one, guess what you need to do as a child of God? You need to wear one. Nobody cares that you prefer not to. There's a lot of things I prefer not to do, but if they tell you that this is what has to happen, and they could be wrong, okay? They don't know everything. I get that. But it is their function, though. It's their function to protect the public welfare. And so if they tell you you have to, guess what? You wear it. As a child of God, you don't break laws that don't directly conflict with his law. You don't do that. And
man,
that's for, and see, this is when I said in the beginning about the purpose of law. The purpose of law is to protect everybody. It
right.
restricts, there's going to be some restrictions on my liberty. It just has to be that way to make society safe and ordered. So there's restrictions on me picking up things that don't belong to me and walking away with them without the intent to give them back. Like I would like to do that, maybe. Here's $1 million sitting right here, and it certainly benefit me to take it. And well, why can't I take it? Well, because it's going to harm somebody else. It's going to cause problems. And so that restricts a liberty that I have. We just need to be really careful about pushing our preferences. If you want to make the laws, then you run for governor of your
Yeah.
state, and you'll find out then that it's not going to all be your way either. But certainly as a private citizen, it doesn't have to be our way.
Right. There is something that you mentioned earlier within this particular part of the conversation, and it was about protesting. And I think you gave the difference between protesting and looting and rioting and all of that. I quickly want to ask, first of all, we saw what happened last summer with the whole ordeal with the cop. I think what was his name,
Derek
Chauvin.
Chauvin,
Yeah, Derek Chauvin and I forget the other guy's
George
name,
Floyd.
George Floyd. We saw the protest that happened. In fact, Key and I went up to Minnesota just to see everything that the community there erected around Chicago Street where he was killed.
Mm,
And man, they put up some. I mean, artists came out and put up some nice art of him on buildings, erected this statue of a fist and things like that with flowers around it. Anyway, all of this was an act of protesting something that the community deemed was wrong. And so, first, before I ask if it's okay for a Christian to protest, I want to ask, what is protesting? Because I don't think a lot of people understand exactly what it is.
Well, I think protesting is just doing something to draw attention to what you think is unjust or unfair, right? So there could be a small act of protest. Like I remember in school, when I was in high school, there were sometimes if something was going on, maybe we as students would decide we were going to not show up to a class. right? That was an act of protest. If we think that the teacher is doing something, I'm not talking about something trivial, right? But we think
Right.
the teacher's doing something that is, not okay, and we've brought it to people's attention and it's not getting resolved. Okay, we're not going to show up to class. That's an act of protest. Okay, it's doing something to draw attention to, something that you think is unfair or unjust. And the nature of the thing is that it's going to inconvenience someone else. Like I just love this idea that find another way to do it because I don't like that way. No, that's not the way protests work. That's just not the way protests work. Protests are going to inconvenience other people. Okay, so when Martin Luther King and the group that was with him, when they did the march on Washington, you know
Right.
what? They interrupted traffic in order to march.
They
Now
did.
they had to, when they do these marches, they would go through and get the proper clearances and so forth with the government because there's things that you have to do to do that lawfully. But the people are going to be inconvenienced. Okay, but I'm inconvenienced whenever I see people doing these bike riding things through the city and they rope off the streets and all that. That inconveniences me.
Hmm.
Okay, if there is a funeral procession, you know what? That inconveniences me. I have to sit here for the light to change 3 times while these people come through. Protests they're going to be inconvenient. That's just how they work. Okay, so if it's a political protest, if it's a religious protest, I know people, young Christians who go to, I don't know about last year because of COVID, but for years they would go to DC to protest against abortion. They would go
Yeah.
from wherever they were to DC to voice their displeasure about the fact that abortion is legal in our country.
Right.
I say again, protesting is part of the fabric of America. It's how we got here. And we tend to have aversion to it if we don't agree with people in what they are protesting, or we don't like the people who are doing the protesting. But we need to be really careful about suggesting that there's something wrong with protesting just because it's inconvenient for us. Now we're missing something pretty significant when we think like that. You just disagree or don't agree, but people do that to draw attention.
Attention. Yeah.
That's the whole point.
And in fact, the part of this, the reason for this question is, just I think in 2019, I went down with a group of Catholics, believe it or not, who were standing down at the local abortion center down here in the corner from the church building. And I just thought to myself, I was asking people, I said, hey, how many of you guys go down on Fridays when they do the abortions to protest, maybe to at least hopefully put an image in the mother's mind that would change their mind, help them change their minds from going into that facility and, doing the inevitable. And so I went down to join those people who were Catholics and protesting against abortion. And I remember talking to one of my Christian friends about it, and he just thought it was wrong, man. He was like, "How could you team up with the other side?" And I told him, I mean, maybe you can shed more light on this, but I said I don't think that's the point. I mean, the point is abortion is sinful, and my job as a Christian, at least I feel, is to protest sin.
Hmm.
Part of that, I feel like we do that on Sundays anyway. When you preach against sin, it's sort of like you're voicing you're voicing that sin is wrong. And so I think part of our preaching is protesting against sin. But that sort of leads me into this idea. I mean, you go back to the sports realm and you saw these athletes who refused to stand and acknowledge the flag or acknowledge the Pledge of Allegiance. First of all, let's retract. What is the meaning of the Pledge of Allegiance anyway? Why do we say it? Why are we to say it? And are Christians permitted to pledge allegiance to America, given all that the Bible says about pledging and how it warns us against pledging in certain situations anyway?
Well, I assume the pledge has different meanings for different people, and that's part of the difficulty. Is everybody thinks
Mhm.
whatever it means to them has to be what it means to somebody else. Well, it just doesn't work that way. Um, but I think where does it come from? It's just a matter of indoctrination. That now I hope I don't say that to be offensive to people, but that's just a matter of fact. When you try to get a group of people to stand up and rehearse a mantra together, pledging their elite. I mean, you're trying to indoctrinate people into, patriotic fervor and so forth. And probably every nation that's ever existed has done some of that.
Right.
I'm particularly leery of it myself. I don't, as a Christian, pledge my allegiance to anyone or anything other than Jesus, like no one, nothing. And to me, it sets you up for a pretty obvious conflict because our nation doesn't only do and promote things that are consistent with what God wants done and promoted.
That's it.
So if you pledge your allegiance to God and you pledge your allegiance to America, you're attempting to serve two masters. Jesus said it can't be done in Matthew chapter 6.
I thought I was crazy.
No, no, no. I've said that to people many times, and I think people just don't think about it.
Mm,
Okay. And then when they're kind of challenged on it a little bit, it's uncomfortable for them because they kind of tie their idea about being a Christian and being an American all together so
right.
that it's one thing. And it's not one thing at all. Like in my preaching, sometimes I remind people, you don't have to love America to go to heaven. I don't know if everybody realizes that, but you just don't. So, like, Christians will sometimes get upset with each other because, this one stands for the flag and that one doesn't stand for the flag. And this one's okay with kneeling and that one's not okay with kneeling. It's like, wait a minute, you can go to heaven if you kneel or not. I don't really care what people think about America. It's my home. I mean, my family's been here for a long, long time, longer than most of the people,
Right.
longer than most of the people who consider themselves, patriots and loving America. My family's been here for hundreds of years. Okay. Um, I don't care if you love America. Follow the rules, don't break the law, but you don't have to think America is the best country on earth or the best country in the history of the planet. Like that's so anyhow, I do think there's a real conflict, as I see it, with pledging your allegiance to anyone or anything. You can only have one master. And when the two come into conflict, you're going to break your word to one or the other.
Man, I could not. First, just thank you for clearing that up. I thought I was insane. I shared this idea with a fellow Christian brother, and we had some lengthy discussion about the idea, but I just could not, fathom the thought in my mind. Like, man, if I'm pledging allegiance to America, which is a country that stands for various things that, I mean, many things that are
Mhm.
directly opposed to Christianity. I mean, what am I really, pledging to, right? I mean, I know that as you stated before, I'm to pledge my allegiance to no one but Christ. But then there was the side like that felt uncomfortable within me because I'm okay with people who kneel or stand. Like you, to me, it doesn't make any difference. But then on the other side, there's people, at least for me, I felt like there was pressure on both sides, right? So you have pressure to be in line with Christian opinion and tradition, and to be caught up to date with the current social movement. And it's almost like you're being caught in the middle. And so I always wondered about that, and especially given the strict warnings against what we pledge for and things like that. So yeah, thank you, man. That clears a lot of things up in my mind at least. So
Yeah,
uh,
just follow the law. If it doesn't conflict with God's law, follow the law and be a good Christian person. I mean, if you do that, guess what? You're loving America.
mm,
You're respecting the rules and you're doing your best to be the best person you can be, best influence you can be in your home, in your school, in your community, and so forth. Like you, if that's not loving America, what is it? If loving America means I have to affirm everything that the majority says, we have a big problem.
mm,
Okay, because the
for sure.
majority has affirmed some things that just are absolutely not right in the past and in the present. And so if I can't stand up and say, hey guys, this is wrong, like to me, that's patriotic. To me, that's patriotic.
That's true.
Okay, standing up and saying, hey, we went left when we should have went right. We need to make some change. That is loving America. So like in my family, if somebody's not doing something they should be doing, the fact that I care enough to sit down with them and have a conversation with them to try to help them get it together, like that's love. That's loving America.
Right.
loving America is not just saying no matter what America does, it's always right. It's always the best. It just, come on, America's going to go the way every empire in the history of this world has ever gone.
Right.
Somebody's going to be reading about America in their history books. If Jesus delays coming long enough, they'll be reading about us the way we read about Rome.
That's
It's just
true.
going to be. It's just the way it's going to be.
And I remember asking a very, I guess now I would consider it to be a controversial question in class. And it was, do you pray for other countries the way that you pray for your country? And, I got some funny looks. I'm like, well, I mean, just think about it. I mean, I know that often when I would ask them, the guys to pray, and it was always, God, thank you for our country and things like that. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I don't hear thank you for other countries, like Russia and
Mhm.
the South and North Korea, things like I don't hear any talk like that. And I asked, is that wrong? Are we not to pray for other countries? Are we not to consider other countries in our prayer? Is America the ultimate standard of morality? I mean, of course not. I mean, we should consider other countries. So, but yeah, definitely, thank you for clearing that up. And we only have about actually three more questions, man, and then we're preparing to wrap this thing up. It's been a great conversation so far, and I guess before I get too far gone into these details, I wanted to ask: Can America, can the law in this land govern or legislate righteousness? That was a big one for me. Can the law of America legislate righteousness?
Well, if the laws are just laws, they're going to require righteous conduct and they're going to punish unrighteous conduct. So I think it has to legislate righteousness. I mean, in the same way that God's laws regulate righteousness, they tell you these are the things to do in keeping with right relation with God. These are the things you have to do. And these other things, if you do, then you're not going to be in right relation with God, and they'll be punished. So, yeah, if a government says, killing someone is wrong, is that a matter of legislating righteousness? I think it is. They're telling you that if you do those things, those unrighteous things, you'll be punished. So, raping, robbing, stealing, killing, yeah, those things will be punished. Now, people like to say you can't legislate morality. They like to say that, but they don't believe that. Nobody believes that. What you can't do is make someone think properly.
Hmm.
Okay, but you can curb bad behavior.
Hmm.
So what if you say, okay, so, I believe, marriage is what God says it is. And I believe that, a male is what God says he is and the female is what God says she is. But, if you live in an environment where there are people who behave in ways that are inconsistent with that, you can't necessarily legislate what they think about those things,
Right.
but you can put laws into place that would restrict behaviors that are injurious to the community.
Right.
So the idea that you can't legislate righteousness, and a lot of people say legislate morality, I just think, well, that's just not true. One of the functions of law is to educate people about what's right and what's wrong.
Exactly. That was one of the primary thoughts I had. I mean, isn't law supposed to teach us what's right and wrong? And I guess to a certain extent, at least maybe you can shed more light on this. The law would teach us values, then, right? As people, would you say that?
Well, it does, right? So you have property laws. What's the function of property laws? It teaches you that you can't go on to other people's personal property. We call it a trespass. If you go onto
Right.
somebody's property without their permission or invitation, that's a trespass. The law is teaching you that there is a line that you can't cross without getting consent of the other person. Or if you talk about like assault and battery, okay, my body is my body. There are laws that are designed to protect my body. You can't touch my body or do anything to my body um, that would be harmful or offensive to me without my permission. And those laws are intended to teach us the boundaries that we need to follow in living in an ordered society. I just, come on, in a house, if I, so my kids, you got a little one, my kids are a bit
Right.
older than yours right now, but when your kids are really small, man, here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to be able to sit down and reason with them to help them understand everything. No, your
True.
kid's going to go and try to stick a fork in an electrical socket, and you're either going to sit down and try to explain electricity to a 3-year-old, or you may have to do a little pop on the behind. No, don't touch that. Okay, well, what did you just do? You just taught the child that that behavior is not acceptable. And you know what? And the child learned it.
Yep. That's true.
Um, that's, now as when the child is older, you'll be able to explain it and reason and all that. But there are going to be some people in life who just they'll make a conscious decision that it's worth it to them to do the thing that they're not supposed.
Think I might have lost you.
I don't know how much
Oh, it's picking up where you left off. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. So I don't remember how much I had actually said about how much did you hear about what I was saying about the child sticking the fork in the electrical socket and all that?
Yeah. So you finished saying that, and then you said you're really not going to take the time to reason with the child at that point in
Oh,
time. You're going to
yeah.
tap on the hand, and they're going to get it. So, and then that's when you said, "Ch," and
Okay.
it shut off.
Well, you can't reason with the child. At least there's only a very limited amount of reasoning that you can do, but you can by enforcing the law that a child is not supposed to say sticking a fork into an electrical socket. By doing that, you can actually teach the child. Um, and so it's the same way when it comes to society. You can have laws in place while the person may not agree, they may not understand, they may not think about it the way you think they should think about it. By having the law in place and the punishment that follows, you can curb certain behaviors. And then, of course, there's sometimes where people will make a reasoned decision that it's worth it to them to break the law because they might get away with it or because the punishment isn't severe enough. And then you have these sort of increasing punishments and penalties to make them rethink their calculation. It's like
Right.
my kid may think, well, if I eat this and I'm not supposed to, the worst that's going to happen is, my dad will not be happy with me,
Right.
and it's worth it to me, and it's worth it to me. Oh, okay. So then I need to have a different punishment.
Right.
And then the next time you think about it, so, well, nah, the punishment will be more severe, so it's not worth it. Like he may still think that that's what he wants to do, but not do it because. So we do the point is, yeah, we do legislate righteousness or morality. We do control people's behaviors with laws. That's the function of law. God says, Romans 13 says that these guys the rulers are supposed to restrain evil.
Mm.
That's the function, is to legislate righteousness, to legislate out unrighteousness.
Hmm. Man, that makes perfect sense. And in fact, I know I've been confusing that for quite some time. And so yeah, thank you for clearing it up and making it very practical. As we prepare to just come to a close here, I wanted to ask one final question, and then we'll leave. That's a little bit of time if you have anything to leave the younger generation with as far as practical advice and how we can navigate our society, of course within the context of sportsmanship and sports illustration, and that'd be great. uh uh, what is the difference between religion and law, and can the two exist in harmony?
Well, yeah. So well, it depends on which laws you're thinking about, because obviously God gave religion and law together. If you think of religion as sort of the system of living and interacting with God and with other people based on God's expectations. If you think of religion sort of that way, not just the acts of worship, but it's the system of how you live and interact with God and other people based on God's expectations. Well, there's laws for that, okay?
Right.
Because God doesn't allow you to sort of interact with Him however you might desire. He gives you rules and guidance about doing that. The same way a parent gives rules. I got 2 children. I give them rules about how they interact with me and how they interact with their mother, okay? Because there's certain things that are appropriate, certain things that are not appropriate, and I have to make sure they have that guidance so that they can do things the way that things should be done. God does the same thing with human beings. Right. Now, of course, there's human laws, and there may be little inner overlap between religion and human laws. Rightly conceived, human laws will have a lot of the basic tenets from religion. Again, most societies, you're not going to have a civilized society where like murder is okay.
Right. Yeah.
Unjustified, unlawful killing of a human being, like listen, the Bible will tell you shall not kill or murder. And these people may not be taking that from the Bible, but there's going to be substantial overlap about certain kinds of things. But there may be no substantial overlap. And that actually is okay. That's actually okay. Like, we don't have to live in a country where everybody would self-identify as a Christian. No, that's like a historical anomaly. Okay, when you go back in Bible times, most people did not self-identify as Christians, and those folks were able to be and do everything that God wanted them to be and do. It's okay. Sometimes people get a little bent out of shape. They say America was a Christian nation. I don't believe that, but I mean, a lot more people would have self-identified as Christians, to be sure. But it's okay for America not to be a quote unquote Christian nation, because God is not going to save America anyway. It's who we, so I hope the laws are just, and I'll do what I can to influence just laws, but the laws of the nation are different, separate from God's expectations for how I interact with Him and other people. The better the laws for the nation are, then the more symmetry I will find between pleasing God and obeying the laws. But they don't have to, the one doesn't really have to inform the other. I don't need the government to take the laws they make out of the Bible. I don't need that. I'm going to disagree with a lot of whatever they come up with. Right. That's the whole thing with people, like with prayer in school and stuff like that. I know this is a different angle, but people say, well, they took prayer out of school. And I'm like, listen, a lot of the stuff they were going to do, I was going to disagree with anyway. I'm okay. I mean, let me pray. If I want to pray, you ought to let me pray, because I have a right to exercise my religion. But I don't need you putting it on me for people to do things that I might not agree with religiously. You see what I mean? Just let me do what God wants me to do, and you don't have to try to force that on me. Just don't. I prefer it if you don't try to hinder me from doing it, but you don't have to force it on me.
No, that's true. And especially now, given all the social change and social movements that are taking place, I know that there are Christians, especially the younger generation, who are, and this is not overlooking any other Christian in any other generation, but specifically the younger generation are at the forefront of these particular social movements, in the sense that they're facing it head on right now. And so as we close, man, I mean, is there any practical advice that you can give to the younger Christians regarding how to navigate within this society where so much social change is happening and taking place now?
Well, I guess one thing I'd mention, there's a passage that comes to my mind, which I say it's really important to keep at the forefront of your thinking when you're dealing with challenges and obstacles. It's 1 Corinthians 15, verse 57 and 58. Paul says, but thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. And he says, Therefore, beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, because you know that our labor is not in vain in the Lord. Okay, now what's my point there? There's going to be a lot of challenges. Every generation has different kinds of challenges. The key is Jesus Christ died for us to secure victory for us. And the victory he's talking about in 1 Corinthians 15 is overcoming death, right? Like, no matter what happens in this life, we win. We
Right.
win.
That's
Okay.
good news.
The key thing here is we have to make sure we don't forfeit the victory. So he says, and this is my advice, he says, be steadfast. That is, fix your own mind. Whatever goes on in the world around you, you will never walk away from Jesus Christ, because he is the victory. So if you want to be on the winning side, you got to stay with him. He says, be immovable. And that is, there's going to be people around you, there's going to be influences in society that are going to try to move you away from where God wants you to be. But he says, be immovable. You know, Jesus was steadfast. God wanted him to do something, and he was willing to do it. He says, let this cup pass from me, but nevertheless, your will, not my will, right? He wasn't always excited about what he was going to have to go through.
That's true.
But he was fixed in his mind. And there's going to be some things that we have to go through in order to be faithful to God in this world. And we're not going to be excited about it. As a matter of fact, we may be terrified of it. But you need to be fixed in your mind. You're never going to walk away from God, no matter what's going on. And don't let anyone or anything move you. The other thing he says is always abounding in the work of the Lord. And that's what we need to do. You know, we need to always be busy building up and bringing people into the family of God. If we're busy doing that, then a lot of the stuff around us, it just won't be quite as big a distraction for us as it sometimes is. You know, if I'm busy working, then I just don't even, a lot of things that are going on, they just can't get my attention because I'm busy working over here. So that's kind of what I would suggest. You know, fix your mind first. Jesus is the answer. And if you know that Jesus is the answer, he's the victory, then the last thing you could ever do is walk away from him. And there's, you know, there are going to be challenges. So don't let those things surprise you. You just have to be immovable and be working. And now that's sort of the doctrinal thing. If you want to look at a text there, I think that's something that really could be helpful, because young people are challenged in a lot of the ways by the way that the Corinthian church was being challenged in this modern generation. The other thing I'd mention is the idea of sportsmanship. This is really important to me. You know, sportsmanship in athletics is important because what you learn, if you're good, you know, good sportsmanship, what you learn is that how I conduct myself and how I treat other people is not controlled by how they treat me or by my circumstances. It's just that there's this standard for who I am supposed to be and how I am supposed to behave. And even if other people aren't who they're supposed to be and don't behave the way they're supposed to behave, I'm still responsible to be who I'm supposed to be and behave how I'm supposed to behave. That's good sportsmanship, right? So I played sports all the way up through until I was just kind of a little bit too old to do it. But you know, hey, I'd play against teams, and man, sometimes they would kind of, you know, walk the line or break the rules. But you know, if I was being a good sport, I didn't get out of character for who I was supposed to be. You know, sometimes I do my best, and you know what, we would lose anyway. I'm still going to walk up to those people afterwards and shake their hand and congratulate them and wish them well, because the circumstances are not ideal, you know, but that's who I'm supposed to be. Or I felt like the referees were making bad calls, you know, but I wasn't going to scream and show them up and all that. I was still going to be respectful and maybe try to call their attention to something or another, but, you know, remain within the bounds of who I'm supposed to be. Now, I say all that to say, you know, you're going to interact with people in the world who are not going to do things the way they're supposed to. They're not always going to speak to you the way that they're supposed to or treat you the way they're supposed to. And unfortunately, I think older people are showing younger people the wrong way to respond. I
All
just
too
think,
often.
yeah, it's the old timers who seem to think that they can just, talk to people any kind of way and lose their composure and get upset because other people are not doing. Now, my encouragement would be, listen, love people, even when they're not lovable, respect people, even when they don't respect themselves, be who you are supposed to be. Now, that's what being a good sport is. And I think we need more of that in life. It'll take you a long way.
Amen. Amen. I could not have asked for any better advice. You're speaking directly to me, which is part of the reason that I wanted to even start a podcast platform anyway, was to gain as much knowledge as I possibly can, and to, of course, have a library that I can then turn over to my son once he's older. So definitely appreciate your brother Melvin and the time that you've taken out to be on the show today.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's a great show. I'm glad that you're doing it, and I'm glad you let me participate.